let's take a look at. So the Xiaomi Redmi Note 10 Pro. It is not a phone that you are unfamiliar with. It has been a year since it has been out. You would ask, why are we looking at it now? Well, the past can show us the mistakes we've made. Let's look at the progress that Xiaomi has made over the years. Let's start with the design. So the design of this phone, I wouldn't call it anything special, but at least it looks pretty. This bronze color, they call it the Mystic Bronze, and well, I have to admit that this is quite an elegant looking back. It is a glass sandwich, however, the frame is made out of glossy plastic, not aluminium and not steel. At this price point, I wouldn't expect them to use any metal either. The top has a speaker grill, the headphone jack, which indeed is a refreshing sight, a microphone port, and an IR blaster, while the bottom houses the Type-C USB port and another microphone port and a speaker grill. The right side of the phone has a power button which doubles as a fingerprint scanner, and it is quite fast. Above it are the volume rockers, which aren't the most tactile, but they will get the job done. And at least from the time that I have used them, they haven't shown any faults or cracks. Now, the camera cutout is rather massive, and it does make the phone rock quite significantly. I have some issues with this cutout basically. Now, rocking isn't exactly an issue for me. I use a case anyways, and that case is quite thick, so the thickness evens out. What I do not like about this is the labeling of Ultra and Premium. I am not sure whose idea it was, but it looks quite cheap and actually takes away from the otherwise premium variants of this phone. It has a 108 megapixel primary camera without OIS, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera without OIS, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth camera. So I think it is safe to say that it has 3 cameras, because the 4th camera is just a gimmick. I haven't actually noticed any advantage even while taking portraits. Now the screen is 6.67 inches diagonally. It is an OLED display with a refresh rate of 120Hz. It is a punch hole camera, and for some reason they failed to make this camera symmetrical, and if you look at it closely, it might become bothersome. The display is an OLED, and as you would expect from an OLED, the colors are punchy, the blacks are inky. What more do you want? It has a refresh rate of 120Hz, and that is actually quite smooth. Scrolling is a joy, swiping is a joy. I do not have many complaints with that. However, if you equip a phone with a fast refresh rate display while not equipping it with a suitable chipset, you might run into some problems, and this is where I come next. Before I dive into the performance, let me talk about the display a bit more. So, the display is plenty bright, everything is perfectly legible in broad daylight, and as I stated before, the 120Hz display is smooth, everything works well, and I do not have any particular complaints with the display. Do keep in mind that if you are used to the high-end displays of the Samsung flagships, you will notice a difference, especially in the reproduction of colors and color accuracy. However, for this price range, it was quite ample back in 2021, and it's still pretty good today. Now, performance. So, the phone is equipped with a Snapdragon 732. Now, back in 2021, it was no powerhouse, and with time, the phone starts to show its age. So, after 1 year, I wouldn't say I'm too pleased with the performance. Now, for daily tasks, it's fine. It works, I would say, reliably. However, there are moments when it starts to stutter, and when it gets mixed with some user interface bugs, things really get annoying. For example, now let me show you something. So I'm going to call myself and look at the delay when the sound first appears and compare it to the moment when the caller ID appears. Now here's the phone. I'm going to call myself. Now you can see, as you could see, there was a perceptible lag before the caller ID appeared. Now under worst case scenarios, this can actually take quite a long time, and sometimes you actually fail to pick up a call because of this lag. Now the phone isn't, I wouldn't call the phone smooth as butter when it comes to performance. There is your occasional lag and stutter, and well, to be fair, we've used it for a year and these things eventually start to crop up. I am yet to use a phone which was immune to such flaws. Now that we have the performance out of our way, let's talk about the speakers. Well, as I mentioned before, there is a speaker grill at the bottom and a speaker grill at the top. So how is the audio quality? Well, I would say that it is I wouldn't say that it is mind-blowing. I think it does the job done. At least it is a stereo setup, so I think the audio is fine. Nothing surprising to report there. However, the headphone jack, which was actually a very welcome addition, died after 6 months, which was rather odd. So let's talk about the main selling point of this phone, the camera. Packing a 108 megapixel sensor inside, the main camera captures quite pleasing photos. The colors are natural. I'll show you the samples as well. We have an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, which is okayish, nothing too remarkable to report there. It has a 5 megapixel macro camera which actually takes excellent photos. The 2 megapixel depth sensor is also present, but I still haven't figured out its use. They say it is for capturing accurate portrait photos and for accurate background rejection, but I really haven't seen any difference. So the samples, now I'm going to share the samples with you. So this is our first image of an old school camera, and as you can see, there are some spots that are overexposed, but overall the aesthetic of this picture is quite impressive. You can see that it is not overly saturated. They have just bumped up the saturation to make it pleasing for the casual consumer. The details are well preserved and the noise is next to nothing. The second picture has been taken for a typewriter. Here I think that there is a problem with the saturation levels. The orange of the typewriter is not well represented, and I think that because of the excessive saturation here, there are some details that are missing, but the keycaps and the dust on it, that has been covered to perfection. Again, noise is minimal and their details are well preserved. However, there are some issues with the sharpening algorithm. There is softness at the edges of the frame, and that is the problem with all of these 108 megapixel sensors. So you cannot fault Xiaomi here. The third picture is basically an ultra wide shot of the typewriter. There is a distinct difference in the color science of both cameras, which I'm not surprised about because it is not a $1,500 flagship, and the result again I would say is acceptable. It costed around 57,000 Pakistani rupees, and I think outside, for example in the States, it costed around $300. So for that price you can't fault it too much. If I had to pick some faults, I would say that again the saturation is a bit too much here. The colors aren't being represented accurately, and there is some noise, especially around the corners. I think here you can actually see a lot of detail. My main gripe here is again with the sharpening. There are spots which basically appear to be out of focus, but overall again I think it is fine for the price. And this is a macro shot of this phone, and I have to admit that this is probably the best macro phone I have used. I have used quite a few phones prior to this, including the OnePlus 7 Pro, which had 13 megapixel ultra wide camera that doubled as a macro shooter, and I think that you could say that pixel per pixel that had a better camera sample, but because it was an ultra wide camera, it was pretty hard taking a picture with that. This is another macro shot taken of the texture on the antique camera, and you can see that despite being only 2 megapixels, the details are actually pretty good. Now let's talk about the selfie camera. Well, I'm personally not a selfie guy. However, for the sake of this video, I'll make an exception. So this is my selfie, and as you can see, this 16 megapixel shooter has given us, like, I believe, an average output. There is a lot of smoothing going on in it, despite me turning off all sorts of beauty filters. However, I will commend them for the absence of noise here and accurate color reproduction. Besides, this was actually a challenging shot for the phone because it was right next to the studio light and it exposed the overall picture quite well. So with this, our overview of the camera is done. For a detailed camera comparison, stay tuned for more. Let's talk about the battery now. Packing a 5500 mAh battery, I would expect it to last at least 2 days. However, I have to charge this phone twice a day. Why? I'm pretty sure it has to do something with the software. The battery optimization of this software is frankly quite horrible. The charging speeds are normal. I'd say for a 35 watt charger, you can charge this device in an hour and 30 minutes. However, for the sake of experiment, let's say I charge this phone to 100%. I do not recommend you do that because that is rather dangerous for your battery and it actually causes a lot of wear of your battery. So if I charge it to 100%, it won't show me that the phone is 100% charged. I'll have to plug it in for like 4 hours before I see the charged icon appear. Now, when that happens, this phone can actually last for 2 days easily. However, if I plug it, like if I charge it till 87% or something, any random figure before 100, the battery drains like no tomorrow. I have to charge this phone twice a day. A 5500 mAh phone that I have to charge twice a day. Now that is disappointing and it is all down to the software. Now the gaming performance of this phone is fine. It will run anything and without breaking a sweat. It does heat up though, but I haven't seen a phone that won't heat up. Throttling is common. Performance deterioration, despite the heat, I haven't noticed anything that would be a red flag. So yes, for me the gaming performance is fine. However, do note that I'm not a mobile phone gamer at all. Now, one aspect of this phone is left, and that I believe is the major problem with this device and why I never got fond of this. The software is not my cup of tea. Let's start with the aesthetics. I for one do not like this layout of notification. They are basically trying to imitate iOS. That is not my preferable notification shade layout. Let's talk about the settings. The settings menu. Everything is a mess here. I always have to use the search bar to find the setting that I am searching for. And don't get me started on the bugs. Let me give you an example. A live demonstration. So many times when I'm taking a screenshot, I'll press the volume rocker and the power button, and as you just saw, now the volume menu will stay on this phone permanently. It won't go away. Despite me scrolling up and down, it will stay there. The volume just went from maximum to 0 and it won't go up. Again it went down. I will again increase it. It will again go down. Just by taking a screenshot. This is a very annoying bug, and despite the updates, they haven't fixed it. Similarly, there are many bugs scattered throughout the software, and that is what breaks the deal for me. Only if they had made this a better user experience, I would have recommended this phone, even despite being a year old. And that is one of the reasons why I am skeptical of recommending a Xiaomi phone to anyone, because the software experience needs major improvements. The entire aesthetic needs a complete total overhaul, and they have to iron out these bugs. The call quality of this phone is adequate. However, the haptic engine is pretty poor. Whenever you type, whenever there is any haptic feedback, you are reminded of a budget phone, and that is one of the places where they have cut costs. Now you might say that this is a petty grievance, but trust me, a good haptic motor matters a lot. It totally changes your experience, the way you interact with your phone. A cheap haptic motor is a constant reminder of the fact that you're using a subpar device. Now, would I recommend this phone? Well, if you go look at used prices of this phone, they still vary from around 35,000. You might be lucky to find a phone below 30. However, I find myself hard to recommend a Xiaomi phone. It has the specs, it has a good display, it has good speakers, the performance is fine as well. As long as there are these bugs and the user interface is so clunky, I cannot recommend this phone. Please do like our video and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.